December 16, 1983 marked a tragic and shocking day for the city of Belfast. On that fateful Friday, Sonny Groton, a well-known U.S. Navy officer, had just returned home to 12 White Street for the weekend. His wife, Norma, eagerly awaited his arrival inside. However, before he could even reach the door, he was mercilessly shot 3 times. This mysterious assassination sparked a decade-long investigation by the authorities in Maine, but unfortunately it yielded no fruitful results. Nearly 17 years later, 2 agents from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, Jeff Morrow and David Truesdale, made a solemn vow to uncover the truth behind the assassination of Officer Sonny Groton. Situated approximately 18 miles north of Rock Island, at the mouth of the Passagasawakeag River, lies the historic and picturesque city of Belfast. This charming mid-coast city in Maine is renowned for its rich history, architectural beauty, and scenic waterways. Often regarded as the finest city to reside in within Maine, Belfast boasts a population of just over 6,000 individuals. The residents of this close-knit community are known for their kindness and hospitality towards both locals and newcomers alike. Since its establishment in 1850, Belfast has been chosen as a beloved home by numerous citizens. During the early 90s, one of such residents was Mr. Mervyn Sonny Groton. Born on November 15, 1937, to Mervyn Laforest and Margaret Hamilton Groton, Sonny spent his childhood and adolescent years in Belfast, Waldo County, Maine. As an only child, he was raised by his loving parents. Those who knew Sonny from his early years to his teenage days all shared the same sentiments about him. He possessed a kind heart, a strong work ethic, and a loving nature, always willing to lend a helping hand. Additionally, he had a passion for gadgets, showcasing his geeky side. Despite his intelligence, Sonny made the decision to drop out of high school during his teenage years. Sonny found himself deeply infatuated with a woman named Norma Small at that time. Despite their contrasting personalities, they formed an unusual but loving couple. Their affection for one another led them to tie the knot in matrimony not long after. In 1954, they joyfully welcomed their firstborn, a son named Russell Groton. 3 years later, on September 29, 1957, their family expanded with the arrival of a baby girl named Betty Ann Groton. Completing their trio of children was a boy named Mervyn. The initial years of their marriage proved to be challenging as they navigated the complexities of balancing their relationship and family life. Unfortunately, their struggles intensified on May 27, 1959, when a devastating fire engulfed their home. Sonny and Norma managed to escape the flames, but tragically, all 3 of their children perished in the inferno. Russell was 4 years old, Betty Ann was merely 1, and Mervyn was a mere 7 months old at the time of their untimely demise. The children's funeral took place on May 30, 1959, at the Combs Funeral Home, followed by their burial in the Grove Cemetery in Belfast, Maine, at 2 p.m. that Friday afternoon. The immense pain and sorrow that consumed Sonny and Norma in the aftermath of this tragedy were indescribable. However, Sonny refused to allow it to consume him entirely. Despite being a high school dropout, he exhibited unwavering determination to rebuild his life alongside his wife. Sonny toiled relentlessly to forge a successful career in the military, ultimately joining the Navy. His fellow Navy officers held him in high regard, admiring his strong moral compass and unwavering belief in the American dream. Despite the hardships he had endured, Sonny had successfully rebuilt his life and his family. With a stable career, Sonny and Norma decided to expand their family once again. Sometime later, they welcomed a baby girl named Rosalind. Over the years, Norma gave birth to 2 more children, a boy named Michael and a girl named Nina. Sonny's determination and resilience allowed him to raise his 3 children while enjoying a fulfilling career in the Navy for the next 2 decades. In the early 1980s, Sonny, still serving as an enlisted naval serviceman, was stationed at the Naval Education Training Center base in Newport, Rhode Island. He took on the role of a machinist mate instructor, training new naval officers in surface warfare skills and shipboard equipment. Sonny's routine involved working and living in Newport during the weekdays and returning to his family home in Belfast on weekends. On December 16, 1983, Officer Sonny Groton followed his usual routine. After training the new naval officers, he made his way back home to Belfast, eagerly anticipating spending time with his wife and children. As he arrived in his driveway around 7:30 p.m., Sonny checked his pocket to ensure his pay was still there before stepping out of his pickup truck. Although his daughter Rosalind was not yet home, he knew his wife, Norma, and son, Michael, were eagerly awaiting his arrival inside. With a smile on his face, Sonny began walking down the driveway, looking forward to embracing his loved ones. Tragically, Sonny never reached the door that night. On the evening of December 16, 1983, Norma Small was enjoying a card game with a friend in the comfort of her home. Meanwhile, she engaged in a phone conversation with her daughter, Rosalind. In another part of the house, Norma's son, Michael, was in his bedroom, strumming his guitar alongside a friend. Suddenly, at approximately 7:33 p.m., Norma and her friend were startled by the sound of a truck pulling up in their driveway. A few minutes later, 3 distinct and loud bangs echoed from outside the house. Rosalind, who was still on the phone with her mother, also heard the noises and speculated that they were caused by the truck backfiring in the background. Curious, she inquired about her father's whereabouts and the source of the noise. Concerned that something might be wrong with her father's truck, she sought answers. Unfortunately, before receiving a response, her mother abruptly ended the call, leaving Rosalind puzzled. Reacting swiftly, Norma rushed outside to investigate the origin of the disturbing sounds. To her horror, she discovered her 46-year-old husband lying lifelessly in a pool of blood in the driveway. The scene was gruesome, with a portion of his face obliterated and his life slipping away before his own home. At precisely 8:45 p.m., Officer Mark Nickerson, a trooper from the Maine State Police, received a distress call from a residence on 12 White Street in Belfast. The caller informed him that Naval Officer Sonny Groton had just been shot. Without hesitation, Officer Nickerson and a team of fellow officers hurried to the scene, arriving a few minutes before 9 p.m. Despite the swift actions of the on-site emergency medical technicians who promptly transported Sonny Groton to Waldo County Hospital, it was tragically too late. Later that evening, Officer Mervyn Sonny Groton was pronounced dead, and the location was officially declared a homicide crime scene. Once the authorities had secured the area, their focus shifted to uncovering any potential physical evidence left behind by the perpetrator. It didn't take long for the detectives to discover 2.30, 30 rifle casings in the family's backyard, nestled between 2 wood piles. They were found approximately 30 to 40 feet away from where Sonny's body was located. Once the casings were collected as evidence, the detectives meticulously searched the entire area in hopes of finding any other clues that could potentially lead them to the perpetrator. Despite their thorough efforts, no additional physical evidence was uncovered at the crime scene that fateful evening. Initially, many officers speculated that it could have been a robbery gone wrong. However, the detectives had a gut feeling that there was more to the story. Sonny had just received his paycheck before returning home, carrying over $900 with him. Surprisingly, not a single dollar was taken from him, indicating that this was not a random act of theft, but a carefully planned murder. The detectives were aware that Sonny had succumbed to 3 gunshot wounds, 2 to his torso and 1 to his face. They eagerly awaited the results of the autopsy to gain further insight into his tragic demise. The post-mortem examination took place the following day, revealing that the first bullet struck his left hip, the second pierced through his left upper arm, traversed his torso, and exited through his back. After being hit by the second bullet, Sonny collapsed to the ground, vulnerable to the final shot fired by the assailant standing above him. While it was not officially confirmed, it appeared likely that Sonny pleaded for his life at that moment, only to be met with a fatal shot that obliterated the lower part of his face. This gruesome murder sent shockwaves throughout the city of Belfast, where homicides were a rare occurrence, leaving all residents on edge. The detectives had meticulously prepared to launch a thorough investigation into the tragic death of Mervyn Sonny Groton, a well-respected and beloved member of the community. The local authorities were left puzzled, questioning who could have harbored such malice towards Sonny Groton. However, the detectives already had a suspect in mind. In cases like this, detectives often adhere to an unwritten rule. When it comes to spousal murders, the initial suspect is typically the spouse. Norma Small had already been surrounded by numerous rumors, making her the ideal starting point for their investigation. Once the detectives began looking into Norma Small, they quickly discovered that there was a significant amount of truth to the rumors. They received information indicating that while Sonny was away at the Naval Education Training Center base in Newport, Rhode Island, Norma had taken advantage of her newfound freedom and led a completely different life than the one Sonny may have known. There was evidence of multiple extramarital affairs, involvement in drug trafficking, and substance abuse. Further investigations also revealed that although Sonny may not have been aware of Norma's drug habits, he may have suspected or discovered some of her numerous infidelities. In November, there had apparently been a heated incident where Sonny expressed his frustration and stated that he couldn't continue in this manner. However, despite everything, he couldn't bring himself to leave the mother of his children and his wife of 26 years. He was the type of man who believed that anything could be fixed, even his failing marriage. Therefore, he decided to put in the effort to salvage their relationship. Unfortunately, Sonny was tragically killed the following month before he had the opportunity to mend their marriage. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing information came to light. An unnamed friend of Norma, who happened to be present at the couple's home when Sonny was preparing to depart for Newport, Rhode Island, provided the detectives with a first-hand account of what she had witnessed. She saw Sonny bid his wife farewell with a kiss and overheard Norma utter the chilling words, "That will be the last time he does that to me." The deeper the detectives delved into Norma's life, the more unsettling the revelations became. She had reportedly expressed her dislike for Sonny's weekend visits and expressed her happiness when he left for the week. Further investigations revealed that Sonny was preparing to retire from the Navy and permanently move back home to Maine. This could have been a potential motive for his murder. The detectives expanded their inquiries and discovered more disturbing statements made by Norma over the years. She had allegedly told friends and witnesses that Sonny's death would make her financially better off due to insurance money. This led the detectives to believe that money was the driving force behind the crime. To support this theory, they delved into Norma's financial records and discovered that she would inherit the real estate she co-owned with Sonny and also receive his death benefit from the Navy. At this stage of the investigation, all signs pointed towards Norma as the prime suspect. However, despite the suspicious nature of their findings, they lacked concrete evidence that could be presented in court. The detectives conducted numerous interviews with Norma, hoping to catch her in a slip-up or obtain a confession. Unfortunately, Norma remained tight-lipped. During one of the interviews, the detectives proposed a polygraph test, but Norma refused. This only heightened their suspicions, as her refusal suggested she was hiding something. The detectives were aware that Norma had hired a hitman, but their attempts to identify the assassin proved fruitless. It was as if the gunman had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only bullet casings. The investigation had taken a turn for the worse, with no confession from Norma and the hitman's identity still a mystery. The detectives were at a loss on how to proceed. Despite the bleak outlook, they had a potential suspect in mind for the hitman, Joel Fuller, the only man in Belfast capable of such a heinous act. Fuller was infamous for his wickedness, described by authorities as the embodiment of evil. He was cunning, intelligent, and devoid of any moral compass. Rumors circulated that he would do anything for money. The detectives made numerous attempts to interrogate Fuller, hoping to uncover any connection to Sonny's murder, but their efforts proved fruitless. Undeterred, they shifted their focus to Norma, hoping she would crack under pressure. She had been interviewed over 11 times, yet she never provided any incriminating information. The case seemed to be growing colder by the day, but the detectives refused to give up. They tried various methods to link Fuller to the crime scene, but all their attempts were in vain. The case was reaching a dead end, with no substantial evidence against Norma or Fuller. Despite multiple failed investigations, the detectives persisted, unwilling to let go. However, as time passed, the case eventually went cold. The homicide file was shelved, leaving the questions surrounding Officer Sonny Groton's murder unanswered. 17 years had elapsed since Sonny's death, yet his murder remained etched in the minds of 2 special agents from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. One of these agents was Mr. Jeff Morrow. Agent Morrow had always harbored the belief that he could solve the case if given the chance, ever since he first learned about it. On the other hand, Agent Truesdale, an undercover specialist, shared the same determination to crack the case. Growing up in a military family, Agent Truesdale was driven by a personal connection to the case, as any harm done to military personnel fueled his desire to seek justice. The 2 agents eventually joined forces to exchange their thoughts and hypotheses for a potential new investigation. After nearly 20 years, the long-dormant homicide case of Officer Mervyn Sonny Groton was finally reopened. This time, a collaborative effort between the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and the Maine State Police was initiated, with detectives and agents working hand in hand. Progress was swift, and Special Agent Morrow soon caught a break when a man named Larry Phillips came forward with a confession that could potentially unmask the killer. The newfound information brought hope and optimism to the investigative team, as it hinted at the possibility of identifying the perpetrator behind Sonny Groton's murder. During his meeting with the investigators, Mr. Phillips recounted a chilling tale from 16 years ago during a road trip through Maine's wilderness with a friend. The conversation took a dark turn when his friend casually mentioned using a .30 to .30 rifle to carry out a murder at the behest of his wife, without disclosing any names. The horrifying details shared by Phillips's friend shed light on the sinister events surrounding Officer Groton's tragic death. In order to substantiate his claims, his friend proceeded to lead him to the creek where he had disposed of the weapon. However, when Phillips attempted to retrieve it, his friend intervened, informing him that the rifle's barrel was bent and rendered useless for direct shooting, thus discouraging any further attempts. The attentive agents then inquired about the identity of Larry Phillips's friend, to which Mr. Phillips disclosed that his name was Joel Fuller. At this point, the investigation had come full circle, as it once again revolved around Joel Fuller and Norma Small, even after all these years. The agents acknowledged that the initial suspicions of the detectives who conducted the original investigation were indeed accurate. Nevertheless, they could not accept Larry Phillips's account at face value, as there remained the possibility that he himself could be the perpetrator, using Fuller as a scapegoat. Consequently, the detectives subjected him to a polygraph test, which he successfully passed. Further inquiries also revealed that the rifle mentioned by Phillips had already been recovered. It was found in May of 1985, a mere 2 years after the murder of Sonny Groton, and the detectives at the time believed it to be the murder weapon. The firearm in question was a lever-action .30 to .30 caliber Winchester rifle, which was subsequently sent to a firearms and tool mark examiner by the state police for analysis of the casings discovered at the crime scene. Despite extensive testing, the examiner was unable to definitively establish that it was the same weapon used to commit the murder. Despite the absence of a concrete murder weapon that could serve as evidence, Phillips's confession provided a glimmer of hope for the detectives. All they required now to obtain an arrest warrant was a confession from either Norma or Fuller. Engaging with Fuller proved to be a straightforward task, as he was already serving multiple life sentences for the murder of 2 drug dealers during the course of a separate investigation. Fuller had been convicted in court and incarcerated a mere 2 years after Sonny's tragic demise. The detectives swiftly made their way to the correctional facility in an attempt to interrogate him once more. However, even after a span of 17 years, Fuller remained tight-lipped. Their next course of action was to question Norma, but they were aware that the conventional methods would not yield any results. They had learned from the mistakes of the previous detectives who had repeatedly questioned Norma to no avail. Therefore, they decided to employ an unconventional approach that would catch Norma off guard. Agent Truesdale, an expert in undercover operations, devised a plan with Agent Morrow. In this operation, Agent Truesdale would assume the identity of Tony, a friend of Fuller, and meet Norma. He would inform her that both he and Fuller had spent time in prison together, forging a friendship. Under the guise of concern, he would then inquire if Norma had divulged any information to the police, as Fuller was apprehensive about her loose lips. The hope was that Norma would take the bait and reveal the secrets she had concealed for all these years. Tracking down Norma proved to be a relatively simple task for the investigators. She had relocated to Gass, a city in Kansas, during the late 1990s. Despite this, the Maine police had kept tabs on her. Following Sonny's demise, Norma had received a substantial sum of $180,000 in life insurance and Navy death benefits. However, she had somehow managed to squander it all, as her financial records indicated a period of financial hardship. The investigators meticulously monitored her every move and discovered that she was employed as a cleaning lady at the Crossroads Motel. Once Norma's whereabouts were established and her activities were under surveillance, Special Agents Jeff Morrow and David Truesdale selected February 28, 2001 as the opportune moment. They discreetly captured photographs and videos of her white vehicle as they trailed her to the motel where she worked. When Norma arrived at the parking lot, the NCIS agents who had been tailing her deemed it the perfect opportunity to initiate contact. Thus, Undercover Agent Truesdale approached Norma and commenced the operation. Agent Morrow, who captured the entire scene on film, felt a wave of relief as the initial phase of the covert operation proved successful. Agent Truesdale had skillfully convinced Norma that he was Tony, a former inmate and close associate of Fuller. Now, all he needed to do was coax her into making an incriminating statement. Although it wasn't a direct confession, Norma had inadvertently revealed that she possessed crucial information. As she vehemently denied being the informant and expressed her ignorance about the identity of the snitch, she instructed Agent Truesdale to assure Fuller that she hadn't cooperated with the police. Special Agent Morrow couldn't help but wear a triumphant smile when Norma expressed her expectation of reciprocation. After 17 long years, she had finally slipped up, and they had caught her. However, there was one statement from Norma that troubled the agents. Her remark about not knowing who could be talking suggested the involvement of additional individuals. Agent Truesdale inquired if she had discussed the matter with anyone else. At that moment, all the Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents and detectives eavesdropping on the conversation knew they had a solid case. Not only did they have Norma cornered, but they also had a new lead. A thorough investigation was promptly launched into Boyd Smith, who was revealed to have resided in Sonny's home as a tenant during the summer of 1982. Boyd was the boyfriend of Rosalind, one of Sonny's daughters. Although it took some time for the investigators to locate him, they eventually discovered his whereabouts and current activities, just like they did with Norma. Consequently, on April 6, 2001, they orchestrated a similar undercover operation involving Boyd. 2 undercover agents patiently waited for him in a red car parked on the side of the road, and it didn't take long for Boyd to arrive in his green pickup truck. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service undercover agents knew they had to handle this situation delicately because, unlike Norma, Boyd hadn't provided them with many details about his involvement. Boyd was put in a position where he had to answer a question that would force him to reveal everything. Finally, after almost 20 years, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service special agents and the Maine police achieved their goal. They managed to extract a solid confession from a witness involved in the case. Following that, the undercover agents engaged in casual conversation with Boyd, hoping to gather any additional information before releasing him. Once Boyd Smith stepped out of the car, the investigation was effectively concluded. It didn't take long for an arrest warrant to be issued for Norma Small. Norma E. Small was born in July 1939 to Mr. and Mrs. Russell Morris Small. She grew up in Belfast, Maine, alongside her two sisters, Yvonne and Dorothy, and her brother Everett. During her teenage years, she fell in love and married her boyfriend at the time, a man named Mervyn Sonny Groton. People who were acquainted with the couple provided numerous statements to the police, highlighting the stark differences between them. Sonny was often described as a kind individual always willing to help others, while Norma was portrayed as a selfish, self-centered, and greedy person who prioritized herself above everyone else. Those who knew them attributed Norma's unpleasant behavior to her upbringing, as it was evident that these negative traits had developed during her childhood. Despite the opinions of others, Sonny, deeply in love, paid no attention to the criticism. However, as time went on, their situation deteriorated over the course of their 26-year marriage. Norma engaged in a concerning number of extramarital affairs, sold and consumed illicit drugs, and frequently deceived and manipulated people for her own benefit. Throughout their lengthy marriage, Norma's offensive actions repeatedly threatened to tear their family apart. Nevertheless, Sonny, always prioritizing his children, persisted in trying to salvage their relationship rather than giving up on everything. In the later years of her marriage, Norma frequently confided in her friends about her disdain for her husband, emphasizing that her only motivation for staying with him was his financial support. Upon further investigation, it became apparent that Norma's husband was growing increasingly frustrated with her actions. Rather than risk losing his financial assistance through a divorce, Norma devised a plan to murder the father of her children, allowing her to benefit from his death benefits and inherit their real estate. The heinous nature of the crime left detectives perplexed for nearly 2 decades, and Norma nearly succeeded in evading justice if not for the intervention of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. On May 7, 2001, Norma Small was charged with the murder of Mervyn Sonny Groton by a jury in Waldo County. She was subsequently apprehended on May 9th in Lola City, near her original residence in Gas City, Kansas. Norma was taken to the Lola police station for questioning by the authorities who arrested her. During the interrogation, she confessed to her crime, admitting that she had enlisted the help of Boyd Smith to kill her husband in exchange for $10,000. Norma had promised to pay Boyd from Sonny's pension after his demise. However, she claimed to have changed her mind, but was unable to locate Boyd in time to prevent him from carrying out the shooting. With her confession on record, the detectives inquired as to the motive behind the murder, seeking to understand the circumstances leading up to the crime and any emotional factors involved. Norma simply stated that there was no specific reason for her actions. She had grown tired of her husband and decided to have him killed. The detectives found her statements perplexing, especially considering the information provided by the couple's daughter, Rosalind, who had already shared details about Sonny and Norma's married life with the authorities. Rosalind had testified that her father had never raised his voice to her mother, had never been cruel or abusive, and had always made sure to fulfill her mother's desires. The detectives suspected that Norma was withholding information and believed she was being untruthful. During the course of the interrogation, an attempt was made to elicit information from Norma regarding the incident. Throughout this period, Norma went on a tangent about how her creator had forgiven her for her actions, thus absolving her of any guilt. When questioned about whether her children would forgive her, Norma confidently asserted that they would understand. The focus of the interrogation then shifted towards the money she had received following Sonny's demise. The detectives inquired whether Norma believed she deserved that money considering her actions. In response, Norma firmly stated that she deserved every penny as she disliked working and it was her sole means of sustenance. Each response uttered by Norma left the Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents and the detectives appalled. Agent Morrow later described Norma's demeanor during the interrogation as cold and devoid of remorse. As the interrogation neared its conclusion after a few more inquiries, the detectives broached the topic of her alleged encounter with Fuller. Norma vehemently denied ever meeting him and contradicted Boyd's account, asserting that she believed Boyd was the hired killer. The detectives were aware that Norma was being untruthful, which further contradicted Boyd's narrative. Despite Boyd's arrest for his involvement, he maintained his story and assured the detectives that Norma was lying. The statements of both Norma and Boyd had now devolved into a conflicting narrative. Ultimately, Norma Small, Boyd Smith, and Joel Fuller were all brought to trial for the murder of Sonny Groton. The 3 murder trials took place in the Sagadahoc County Courthouse during the winter of 2002. During Joel Fuller's trial, he vehemently proclaimed his innocence, and to everyone's astonishment, he was acquitted. The jury justified their verdict by explaining that although they did not believe him, there was a lack of concrete evidence implicating Fuller in the crime. Norma never officially acknowledged that Joel Fuller was the one who pulled the trigger during her interrogation. The incriminating statements she made to Agent Truesdale were deemed inadmissible in court due to being considered hearsay. The trial was highly contentious, with both the detectives and the city of Maine shocked by the outcome. While most residents believed Fuller was guilty, there were still a few who believed in his innocence. The detectives had hoped the jurors would see the truth in their investigation, despite the lack of admissible evidence. However, they also respected the jury's decision, understanding that the key evidence against Fuller was inadmissible. Despite not getting the desired verdict, the detectives found a silver lining, as Fuller was already serving multiple life sentences. In Boyd Smith's trial, a new jury was brought in, this time with hard evidence and a confession proving his conspiracy to commit murder. Unfortunately, state law prevented prosecutors from charging Boyd with conspiracy, leading to his acquittal for the murder of Sonny Groton. The jurors faced a difficult decision, as Boyd was guilty of conspiracy, but not murder, a point his defense emphasized during the trial. Ultimately, they had no choice but to set him free. The final trial at the Sagadahoc County Courthouse was Norma's, where Boyd, recently acquitted, testified against her. He claimed that Norma offered him $10,000 to kill her husband in order to collect his military benefits. Norma vehemently refuted Boyd's claims, even going to the extent of asserting to the jurors that she had absolutely no involvement in her husband's demise. The prosecutors, led by Prosecutor Andrew Benson, then questioned Norma about her initial confession during the interrogation and her current contradictory testimony in court. Norma firmly stated that she never confessed, explaining that she merely told the detectives what they wanted to hear. Fortunately, both Justice Nancy Mills, the presiding judge, and the jurors saw through Norma's deceitful words. After 4.5 hours of deliberation, on August 2, 2002, the jury found Norma Small guilty of both murder and theft. Prior to her sentencing, Attorney Christopher, who represented Norma during the trial, argued for a 25-year prison term. However, Prosecutor Anderson Benson urged Justice Nancy Mills to impose a life sentence for Sonny's murder, along with an additional 10 years for the theft. Following the arguments presented by the attorney and the prosecutor, the judge rendered her decision. While delivering the sentences, Justice Mills described Norma as a callous murderer, devoid of any compassion for her late husband, 3 children, or grandchildren. In Justice Nancy Mills's own words, "This is a contract killing. This is a murder for hire. Mervyn Groton was worth more to her dead than alive, and apparently that proved to be true." Norma Small received a 60-year prison sentence for the murder of her husband, Mervyn Sonny Groton. Additionally, she was handed a 10-year sentence for theft, having collected over $180,000 in death benefits and life insurance. In the aftermath of the trial, Norma's daughter, Rosalind, expressed her disgust when her mother claimed that she and her siblings would understand. She further elaborated on her sentiments in a 2016 documentary, asserting that her father would never receive justice as long as Norma was alive. Michael, Norma's son, also shared his thoughts on the case, disclosing details about his parents' marriage. He then drew parallels between his own life and his father's, emphasizing their shared experiences of early tragedies and strong focus on family values. Michael reflected, "Our lives run parallel. We both faced hardships at a young age. We are deeply committed to our families and strive to set a moral example. I learned how to be a man and a father from my dad." On March 26, 2023, Norma Small, who had been serving a 70-year prison sentence for the murder of her husband Sonny Groton and insurance fraud, passed away at the age of 83. She died under the care of medical staff at the Women's Center in Windham, with her death officially recorded at 12:17 a.m. that Sunday morning.
One fateful night on July 22, 1957, two young couples were in a parked car at a lover's lane on Van Ness Avenue in Hawthorne, near El Segundo, California. They were doing what was typical of teenagers. All of a sudden, their vigorous petting came to an end when they were accosted by a young man who was pointing a gun at them through the car's window. All the four teenagers in the car were compelled by their attacker to exit the car and form a lineup. The attacker, who was predicted to be in his early 20s, then ordered the terrified couples to remove their clothing after taking their money and jewelry. At that point, the teenagers could tell that the attacker was not a local by his accent, and it was clear he had been drinking. The gunman obviously wanted the teenagers' 1949 Ford sedan. Sadly, that wasn't the only thing the 20-something drifter was after. He also sexually attacked one of the girls after tying the hands of three of the victims behind their backs. All four victims anticipated being shot because they could all clearly see their assailant's face. Fortunately, the attacker just sped off in their vehicle. The teenagers were alive, but visibly scared to death. Shortly before 1:30 a.m., the stolen vehicle sped through a red light directly in front of two on-duty police officers on Rosecrans Avenue and Sepulveda Boulevard. The officers, Richard Phillips and his partner Milton Curtis, immediately overtook the sped-up car and forced the driver to come to a stop. The police were not informed of the crimes that the driver had committed since the car had not yet been reported stolen. Officer Richard Phillips prepared to give him a ticket. The perpetrator ought to have simply accepted the summons and left. Instead, when Officer Phillips turned his back, the driver fired 3 shots at him with the same gun he had used to rob the teenagers. Before Officer Curtis could bring out his firearm, the perpetrator fired another round of 3 shots through the window of the patrol car where he sat, striking him. The criminal then left the area, but not before Officer Phillips was able to shoot the fleeing car 3 times with his own gun. 28-year-old Officer Richard Phillips and his 25-year-old partner, Officer Milton Curtis, both passed away before the ambulance Officer Phillips had called for could arrive. Officer Richard Phillips had served with the El Segundo Police Department for 2 years. He was survived by his wife and 3 children, while Officer Curtis Milton had only served with the El Segundo Police Department for 2 months. He was survived by his wife, son, and daughter. Both victims' family was inconsolable. Jane, Officer Curtis' wife, could not stop professing how much she loved him. According to her, they had a misunderstanding before he left for his work shift. Till today, she regrets not having sorting out their issues and saying goodbye properly. Numerous police officers from across the county turned out to try to find the offender, but it yielded nothing. There was not much evidence at the crime scene. The incidents led to the biggest manhunt in California's history, as the culprit appeared to have vanished into thin air. Later, the stolen car was discovered nearby, abandoned. In the car, the police only discovered 2 bullets from Officer Phillips' gun, making the police believe that the 3rd bullet likely struck the attacker. A single thumbprint was collected from the steering wheel. This print failed to reveal a culprit for many years. 3 years after the murder, in 1960, Doe Tooley, the owner of Manhattan Beach, a resident close to the crime scene, went to the police station to submit 2 watches and a .22 caliber revolver he discovered while cleaning his property. It was discovered that the watches belonged to the teenagers who were robbed in 1957, and the revolver was the murder weapon. That night, in 1957, the attacker is believed to have dropped those things while leaving the stolen car behind. These pieces of evidence discovered provided a vital lead. The serial number of the revolver led police to a Sears in Shreveport, Louisiana, where G.D. Wilson was documented as the buyer's name. The gun, which was the cheapest one the shop sold, cost $29.95. Investigators found that George D. Wilson had rented a room at AYMCA close to the Sears store, but had provided a false Florida address. Police investigated every George D. Wilson they could find for years, but nothing came up. Many years later, in 2002, a certain woman reported to the El Segundo police that her dead uncle had once boasted of killing 2 police officers. Although the claim was a dead end, it reignited interest in the police officer's cold case. The fingerprint from the teenager's stolen car in 1957 was examined by investigators using the recently released automated fingerprint identification system. Surprisingly, there was a match to a man named Gerald Fighton Mason, who was found guilty of burglary in Colombia in 1956. Due to that incident, he had to serve a 1-year term in prison. In addition to matching fingerprints, the evidence also included identical handwriting, which connected him to the murder weapon he used to kill the police officers in 1957. Handwriting analyst Paul Edholm determined that the signatures he had on the IMCA receipt and Sears documents in 1957 were identical to the handwriting on his 1999 South Carolina driver's license application and on a bill of sale for a car. It hadn't changed at all. This was another glaring evidence for the investigators to get to the root of the matter. After the murders, Gerald Mason was a law-abiding citizen for 45 years, never receiving even a parking ticket. He was a wealthy retiree. He was married, had 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren. He lived quietly in a suburban area with his family. He owned 2 gas stations. Friends and neighbors regarded him as being amiable and helpful. Without even the slightest regret for the officer's family, who had lost their loved ones so long ago, Gerald Mason was able to enjoy a long and successful life. In the long run, friends and relatives were horrified to learn that he had committed such a heinous murder. On January 26, 2003, the police who had been watching Gerald Mason for weeks and had seen him playing golf with friends and engaging in other benign pastimes eventually knocked on his door. Gerald Mason was said to have been shocked and asked them where they were from. The police officers introduced themselves and told him that they were there because of the murders of 2 police officers in 1957. A horrified Gerald Mason responded with, "My God, you're here for that. That happened so long ago. I can't believe you're here bothering me with that." Gerald Mason's scar from a bullet graze wound caused by a gunshot fired by Officer Phillips in 1957 was used to further identify him as the culprit after his arrest. Following Mason's arrest that January, officers executed a search warrant at his Columbia house and discovered another unique 9-shot .22 revolver similar to the murder weapon. Investigators also discovered 3 witnesses who recognized Gerald Mason as the man they had seen the night of the murders based on a photograph taken in 1956. Due to the overwhelming amount of evidence, Gerald Mason confessed to the cops that he had been drinking when he came upon the teenagers. Then, in an effort to hide the rape, robbery, and car theft, he shot both police officers. "I really don't have an explanation for why this happened. I wish I did," Gerald Mason said. When asked about the teenager he had raped, Gerald Mason said he no longer remembered the reason why he had raped the 15-year-old girl. Following his arrest, Jerry Mason Whitaker, Gerald Mason's daughter, said in an interview, "There really aren't words to describe the range of emotions we've gone through. I could not have had a better father." Gerald Mason professed his regrets to the families of officers Phillips and Curtis during his sentence hearing. "It's impossible to express to so many people how sorry I am. I do not understand why I did this. It does not fit in my life. It is not the person I know. I detest these crimes," he said. The surviving families of the victims did not feel any iota of sympathy for Gerald Mason as they pour out their pains in court. "Your cowardly act shattered our lives forever. You caused our mother to become a widow with 3 babies to raise alone," said Carolyn Phillips, Officer Richard Phillips' daughter. The other slain officer's son, Keith Curtis, claimed outside of court that Gerald Mason's in-court apology had not touched him. "Mr. Mason is sorry now, and we heard his apology speech. He wasn't sorry for 45 years, and the only reason we're hearing that apology now is because he got caught," Keith Curtis said. Gerald Mason was given 2 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 7 years after entering a guilty plea. As part of the agreement, the rape, robbery, and grand theft charges were dropped, sparing Mason's family from hearing about how he had raped a teenage girl, as well as the living victims from having to testify. Gerald Mason's application for parole was denied in 2009. He won't have to appear in front of the panel again for a maximum of 15 years, until March 2024, when he will be 90 years old. Prosecutors in California were adamant that he would never be freed. His plea agreement allowed him to serve his prison term close to his family. Thus, he was detained in South Carolina. However, on January 22, 2017, 9 days before his 83rd birthday, Mason passed away in prison. He had served 14 years behind bars. His next parole hearing was 7 years away.